Hi, I'm Maggie.
And I'm Marin, and you're listening to
Tell Me I'm Sorry,
a podcast where we deconstruct and muse on depictions of girlhood in film, literature, and other media.
A feminist celebration of pop culture, the audacity of youth, and the ways we grow away from and into our bodies, beliefs, and dreams for ourselves and each other.
And today, before we get into what we are discussing, we need to talk about who we are discussing it with, because we have a very special guest on the show today. She is our friend. She is a poet, a lover of pop culture. She also happens to have a degree in, is it chemical engineering?
Mm-hmm.
She is multi-talented, multi-wonderful. Her book of poetry is out now called The Machine Autocorrects Code to I. Everybody in your living room or your car, wherever you're listening, please give a rapturous welcome to Chanlee Luu.
Hi.
Yay!
Yay! Yay for Chanlee. And in honor of this special episode, to commemorate Chanlee and her publication of her book, she has selected the movie that we are going to discuss today, which is called Hero. Yeah. I couldn't remember who says the name of the movie.
It's
okay.
you.
It is me usually,
It's you.
but
We kind of said it at the same time.
I liked it. It was
Anyways.
perfect.
Hero, directed by Zhang Yimou, who has had a very prolific career both in directing film and the stage, which is very cool. He's directed a lot of opera, I learned in browsing his Wikipedia page. I love a creator with versatility. Some of his other films include Zhu Dao, Raise the Red Lantern, House of Flying Daggers, and The Great Wall, which I remember the marketing campaign for The Great Wall because it is a movie about Matt Damon playing an Irish, I think, some European mercenary, and he joins forces with the Chinese army to fight aliens, which are at the Great Wall. I haven't seen it, though.
Me neither.
I just don't like Matt Damon, personally.
Who does? His wife. He's married.
I was about to say his wife, Ben Affleck.
Yeah, but who likes Ben Affleck? I feel like I like Matt Damon more than Ben Affleck.
Really, they're my problematic faves because I grew up watching action films with my dad. So.
Okay. I do find the Oscar speech that Matt Damon and Ben Affleck gave together when they were really young and they won for Best Screenplay, I do find it really endearing because they're just like screaming shit and they're super flustered and they're so baby-faced. And sometimes I watch it. I go down a YouTube spiral of watching Oscar acceptance speeches. But we are not here to talk about Matt Damon.
We really
I'm
went.
sorry.
Well,
I
I
always
just-
introduce these sidebars.
I literally just watched Good Will Hunting for the first time, like 2 weeks ago.
What'd you think?
So, I mean, Robin Williams was in it. So,
I know,
of course,
he's
there was,
beautiful.
against my better judgment, I was like, I get it. I get why we like this.
Yeah. Have you seen Good Will Hunting,
I
Chanlee?
have. It's been a while. I think I liked it, but nothing like super memorable for me.
I have been meaning to rewatch it for about 2 years, which goes to show like how much I'm actually invested in rewatching it because I keep being like, yeah, I should rewatch that. Just because the cast is really kind of interesting. And I haven't seen it since I was a kid when my mom showed it to me. And she was like, this movie has a lot of bad words in it that you're not allowed to say, but it's really good. It has a good heart. So we're going to watch it anyway.
That's sweet. I watched it with TJ, who just loves Robin Williams so much
I do too.
and was a theater major. So
Okay.
he was that definitely impacted my watching experience. It made it more positive because he knew things like about the film and which parts Robin Williams had actually improv'd. And so, yeah.
Lovely. Okay, back on focus. I'm going to stop with these sidebars.
We're not.
Okay,
We're going to do it the whole time.
Hero was also written by Fang Li, Bin Wang, and then Zhang Yimou, released. I have a couple release dates for y'all, and I can already sense another sidebar coming because there's a story behind these release dates. So this film was released in China October 24th, 2002. It was released in Hong Kong December 21st, 2002, and then it was not released in the United States until August 27th, 2004. You want to guess who we have to thank for that botched release date?
My brain is empty.
Chanlee, do you want to?
Oh, I'm on the Wikipedia. So
Oh.
It feels a little bit like I'm cheating, but I haven't gotten to that part yet.
Well, do you want me to tell you? It's Harvey Weinstein.
Oh, God. Fuck.
Because, see, Maggie, you have been blessed with like a normal brain that's not rotten with movie trivia because I see the Miramax logo at the beginning of the movie and I'm like, oh, that was Harvey Weinstein's company. He was associated with this movie in some way. Miramax was a distribution company. So he paid money to market it and stuff. And then I go on Wikipedia and I learn that it was released 2 years late. And I'm like, why the fuck was that happening? And it's because he didn't want to release it. And Quentin Tarantino, I guess, had to step in and be like, we should release this movie. If you want to put my name on the poster as promo, you can. Okay. And Chanlee, we always read the poster taglines for the movies that we watch. And Maggie always does it because she reads them really well and theatrically. And then we discuss if we think they're good. So, Maggie, without further ado, will you read the tagline for this poster? Or wait, I read the taglines. Fuck.
Oh, you read the tagline.
I did this last time. You read the logline. Okay, tagline. One man's strength will unite an empire.
What do we think? Chanlee, what do you think?
Feels like propaganda.
Yeah.
Taglines are movie propaganda.
Yeah, they're propaganda to get you to see the movie. When you say it sounds like propaganda, Chanlee, do you mean
Well, I feel like in relation to the movie,
Right.
too, I have some likes and dislikes. And overall, there are a lot of questions with the movie.
in terms of the version of history that it's presenting? Definitely. I just think it's pretty generic as a tagline goes. But also, how much can you expect from a single sentence? I shouldn't say that, though, because
Talking to a poet.
a single sentence can be very
Just
important.
kidding.
Well, both in prose and poetry.
Yeah, I don't know.
Point is, sentences should do better. Okay.
Get your shit together, sentences.
Please
All
read
right.
the logline.
During China's Warring States period, a district prefect arrives at the palace of Qin Shi Huang, claiming to have killed the 3 assassins who had made an attempt on the king's life 3 years ago. Dun, dun, dun. That's a logline.
I'm pretty satisfied with that as a logline. What do you think?
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're going to do what we call the Marin synopsis, which is when I cover the plot very quickly for people who probably haven't seen the movie. Because most of the people I know who listen to this podcast, they don't actually watch the movies we talk about. But they like listening to us.
That's a good point.
So they're like, yeah, your overviews are helpful. I'm like, okay, then I guess I'll keep doing them. So at the opening of the film, we meet a young man named Nameless, who is played by Jet Li, who is on his way to the palace to meet with the king. And the reason for this meeting is that he claims to have killed the 3 assassins who previously attempted to kill the king. And these assassins' names are Long Sky, Flying Snow, and Broken Sword. Nameless has these assassins' weapons as proof of their defeat, so the king agrees to meet with him and asks Nameless to share the story of the assassins' deaths. And then from there, Nameless's story is told in flashback. So first we see his battle with Sky, who is played by Donnie Yen, whom he readily defeats. Nameless then travels to a calligraphy school where he meets Sword, who's played by Tony Leung, and Snow, played by Maggie Chung, who are former lovers. And they are studying and working at this calligraphy school. And Nameless requests a scroll from Sword. And that's like his into their little circle. Nameless eventually reveals his true intentions and challenges Sword to a duel. Later, Snow witnesses Sword have sex with another woman who is named Moon, and Snow kills him out of retaliation. And then later, Snow battles Nameless instead and he kills her, thus completing his tale to the king. However, the movie does not end here because the king does not buy Nameless's story. He says that he met Sword and Snow years earlier, and he says that he does not believe they would be so, quote, emotionally fragile and lose sight of their political cause due to a personal feud. So the king instead suggests that Nameless is in cahoots with Sky, Snow, and Snord, and that the Sword, not Snord. I'm talking too fast. I'm talking too fast to try to impress our guest. And I'm saying basic words wrong. The king suggests that Nameless is in cahoots with Sky, Snow, and Sword, and that the three assassins sacrifice themselves in order to help Nameless gain access to the king and kill him. And then we see the king's version of what he thinks happens, which involves Snow and Sword, who are still lovers, arguing over who should sacrifice themselves. Because these battles that have been happening we see them take place in front of the king's army to give validity to Nameless's claims, so that way he can actually gain access to the king. And Snow wounds Sword, so she has to fight Nameless instead, and she sacrifices herself. But Nameless then responds to the king's story by saying that the king has underestimated Sword. Nameless finally tells the true story for real, which is that he staged a fake battle with Sky, having perfected a technique where he can stab someone, make it appear fatal to onlookers. When Nameless approaches Snow and Sword about staging fake battles with them, Sword refuses, and Snow reveals that 3 years ago, Sword had the chance to kill the king but didn't because he felt that the king, though a tyrant, was the only person capable of unifying China, and Sword urges Nameless to spare the king as well. And ultimately, Nameless decides to spare the king, and when this news reaches Sword and Snow, Snow is upset and confronts Sword, tries to fight him, but he refuses to defend himself as a way to prove his love for her. She accidentally kills him, and in her grief, she also kills herself, and the film ends with the king still executing Nameless for his murderous intentions, I guess, in order to uphold the law and set an example. But then the king also grants Nameless a hero's funeral. So our movie ends with everyone dead, except the king. And that's kind of a bummer. The end.
Nice. Any thoughts, Chanlee, on the synopsis?
Did I miss anything?
I thought that was a good synopsis. It's like hard following the different storylines if you're just reading and listening to it rather than seeing it all
Exactly.
unfold.
As I was typing this, I was like, how much of this is just a futile gesture? Because the movie is multiple stories within one narrative. And so much of the story is told through the fighting scenes because there's so much vitality to them and physicality and emotionality. And so basically, yeah, if you just spent the last 5 minutes listening to that and are like, I don't know what that woman was talking about, you're probably right.
Even when you're watching it, because it moves back and forth very quickly, and the visual language of the film where we have these washes of color to differentiate the storylines is really helpful as a viewer in terms of keeping track of the truth and the untruths. But basically, there was a lot of fighting.
And a lot of storytelling.
Yeah.
I appreciated how in every different iteration of the story, the Maggie Cheung and Tony Leung characters had different color outfits, but in every story, their outfits were the same color. In the first one, it was red. And then in the second one, it was, I think, lavender or purple. And in the last one, it was white. I enjoyed that. Most of my notes while watching this movie were just about how hot Tony Leung and Maggie Cheung are. Because I don't know if either of you have seen In the Mood for Love.
Yeah, I have.
Oh, you should watch it, Maggie. One of the greatest depictions of romantic yearning ever. And they're in it and they play lovers in it and it's so good. And so I was really excited when they were in this movie together. Okay, Chanlee. At this point in every episode, we do what we call our origin stories, which is when we talk about our first encounter with the film, that we're covering, because oftentimes we're talking about movies that we first watched when we were kids or whatever, though that's not always the case. And we also take that time to give some broader first impressions of the film. And I don't know about Maggie, but me personally, I'm mostly just interested in your origin story. If this was a movie that you first watched when you were a girl, what that experience was, how that has stayed with you. That is where I would really like to start our conversation. Maggie, how does that sound?
Yeah, perfect.
Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. So what is your origin story for Hero?
I actually didn't watch this until maybe 2 years ago.
Oh, okay.
I grew up watching a lot of wuxia films because the Hong Kong ones dubbed in Vietnamese with my parents, and they really loved them. So that's like how my sister and I's names came about. Because in Vietnamese, like the term wuxia or like those types of films are called film Kim Hip, and so my Vietnamese name is Kim Lê, and then my sister's is Kim Hom, and Kim is sword, which is, I guess, Jin in Chinese, which is in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
That's the character he's trying to draw. And then my dad romanticized it to Chan for Americans, so that's my origin story with the name. That's kind of why I chose the movie, but also I chose the movie because of the different stories we tell and what's truth, capital T and lowercase t, which is, I guess, I feel like a little bit of a cliche topic, but
I mean, we love to deconstruct a cliche. So you watched the movie for the first time about 2 years ago, and when you watched it, what were your initial impressions of it?
my initial impressions were like, this is aesthetics wise, like beautiful, like colors, like the fight scenes, and the slow moments of the fight scenes too. It's like hard to find wuxia films. Jet Li and Jackie Chan and don't really make movies that much anymore. So
Yeah.
I am not a action movie connoisseur, so this is very much a genre that is new for me to even experience. But as I'm watching it, because aesthetically it's so beautiful, when I said in summation of your synopsis, oh, basically there's a lot of fighting, I didn't really mean that, because this movie moves beyond the quintessential action film. It's getting us to ask questions about the truth, about honor, about love, about memory. And I was just curious, I'm not sure what the question is in here, but it has something to do with, as a poet, when you watch action movies in general, does this one feel different? Is there a kind of poetry that you see in the genre in general? Does that make sense?
yeah, I guess I have to circle back to my previous comment of like not seeing, like obviously wuxia films are still being made, and then this one feels more poetic and different than like other ones I've seen. And then I guess in like regular action movies, like I guess the Matt Damon Bourne movies, not necessarily poetry, which is why I really like this film.
I think, if I may say something, because I too used the word poetic to describe the action in this movie. And I think in part I'm gravitating towards that word because Maggie is a poet, and I knew that an additional poet in Chanlee would be joining us for this conversation. But the movie also made me think of musicals. And then I was doing this triangulation between this movie and musicals and poetry, which I'll try to explain. Because when I say it made me think of a musical, it made me think about how what makes a musical good is that the singing and the dancing feels inevitable. When you reach that point, it feels inevitable because at that point, characters, they've just been talking like regular people, and the words are no longer enough. Like, in order to express this emotion that we're feeling or work through this situation that we're in, just being regular people and talking about it will not suffice anymore. So we must sing now. We must dance now. And so I think the fighting in this movie functioned in a very similar way to me, in that it felt like whenever it was happening, one, I was just excited because I knew it was going to be good. Like the same way when you're watching the Ideal musical, when a new musical number starts, you get excited for it, versus we've probably all seen musicals where we're like, oh, fuck, they're going to start singing again, and you're not looking forward to it. And it felt like the fighting sequences in this movie were always about when the characters have reached some kind of either verbal or emotional impasse. And fighting was the only way to express whatever it was they had within them and needed to express. And I found that really moving and exciting, because I hadn't ever felt that way about an action movie before. And then that brings me back to poetry, because I feel like, as someone who's not a poet, I think what makes poetry so special is the way poetry is about language pared down. The thing I want to say cannot just be said in, I sound so stupid, but this thing I want to say can't just be said in everyday language. It needs to be in this different form of language that is separate from how we just use language in our primary interactions with each other. So that is how I'm connecting this movie to both musicals and poetry.
I really like that, because I was also thinking of these fight scenes as dancing too.
What is your favorite fight scene in this movie?
I think the first one, because it's in the rain, and there's also the musical instrument playing as it goes on, and then there's that pause, and it's, oh, keep playing, or something like that.
That one was good.
I think that right away in that scene, you know, this is going to be different than what maybe expectations you have coming to a movie where there is going to be violence in terms of fighting. I was really interested in the way that violence is portrayed and how we don't really see, like, we see the blood. We don't see, like, the point of impact.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciated that about this film. And I think that I would maybe be more willing to watch films with a lot of fight scenes if that were the case in those two. Because I felt myself bracing for impact. Like, oh, the sword's about to. But then as the movie went on, I could just relax into it and watch it as a story. I didn't have to brace myself because I knew I wasn't going to have to, I think, in my personal opinion, unnecessary graphic detail where the sword is entering the body.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, because I guess people say get desensitized to like violence and gore, but I feel like I've gotten even more sensitized to that, because even I was watching like the newest Hunger Game, and I felt that was even too gory for me.
This commentary is very fascinating, because the reason I wanted to know if you watched this movie when you were a kid is because we don't necessarily see the point of impact when someone gets stabbed, but we do linger on the wider shot of a person's body with a sword entirely through it. So we're getting the full picture of how they have been injured and are going to subsequently die a lot of the time. And I felt like that would be really intense to see as a kid. So that was why I was curious if you'd seen this movie as a kid, because I remember watching some movie with my dad when I was a kid. I don't even remember what it was called, but this scene is seared into my brain of this sword getting launched at this person, and then it goes through him and pins him to the wall. And it was really scary to me. So it's interesting to hear both of you say that something about the violence in this movie felt less, I don't know, what word would you?
Well, I mean, we get the blood. We get a lot.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Even the way that that is done often feels very with aesthetics in mind. It's highlighting the aesthetic nature of the scene itself rather than the violence that's been inflicted, which to me as a viewer, I feel like gives me an opportunity to then actually reflect on why the violence is being perpetrated rather than the violence itself. It makes the story bigger. It opens it up. But also, I think some of that is like just subjectivity because I was watching The Evil Dead when I was 10. If I had seen this as a kid, I would have been like, oh, where's the gore? But now as an adult, especially since October 7th, 2023, and what we are bearing witness to in terms of the genocide in Gaza, as somebody who really loves the horror genre, I definitely feel myself distancing from it. What do you have to add, Chanlee?
Oh, yeah, I don't do horror. I grew up watching Hong Kong dubbed ones I watched with my parents. I remember a Korean one I watched with my parents, a series called Go, because that's a story about sisters and it's briefly mentioned in here. And so I rewatched that a couple years ago, too.
I've been thinking a lot about the purpose of violence in a film. And is it violence for violence sake? And maybe that's what feels different. Maybe that's what I'm trying to put my finger on here is that even though this is an action film, I don't think that there is violence for violence sake. The violence always feels purposeful and a result of some kind of upset in the social order.
I think it's a pretty fair assessment to say that the movie understands and is positing that violence always comes at a cost. Violence often begets violence. And if there's something hypnotic and beautiful about the action in these fight scenes, they still pretty much always end with someone dead. And that is ugly, or at least heartbreaking.
Well, every death really matters in this movie.
Right.
It's really noticeable. And I don't think you can say that for a lot of other films that revolve around physical violence.
Chanlee, why were you interested in pairing this film with the conceit of this show?
I felt like if I had to pick a movie that goes along with this book, I would pick Hero. But I guess, yeah, when I was getting your text last night about girlhood, I was like, my movie doesn't really line up with girlhood that much.
We can make any movie line up with girlhood unless there are literally no girls in it. When I watched it, I was like, all right, we're going to have an interesting discussion.
I mean, I guess, but like, okay, so Maggie Cheung's character was the one who wanted the king assassinated.
Right.
Because he killed her dad. There's the girlhood aspect of this bond with your father that I guess correlates, my bond with my father and growing up watching action films with him.
Oh, that's interesting too, because I actually wasn't even thinking about this movie being in conversation with girlhood. I was only thinking about it being in conversation with the book, which obviously Chanlee wrote it, so it's in conversation with girlhood. I will say the fight scene between, is it Snow and Moon?
Yes.
Is my favorite one in the leaves. I was like, is this sexy? Like, it really is, I think. I think you could say that about all of the scenes, but in particular that one, and maybe in part that's just me being superficial because they're both very beautiful. I do think there's something erotic about that fight scene in particular.
I was choosing between those two when, Aaron initially asked my favorite fight scene. You know how sometimes the cliche is that, when two women are fighting over a man, they're really fighting for each other? They really want each other?
I've never heard that before.
Sounds like some fan fiction that needs to be written.
I guess Mean Girls, like Regina is secretly a lesbian, or like
okay,
is.
Yeah. Interesting. It's definitely a really charged scene, which all the fight scenes are very charged in this movie. I think that's why they're so good. But I don't know if I thought about it in a they want each other kind of way, but I think now that this idea has been brought to the table, I guess within the context of that scene, he has died. The man between them has died, right? And so these two women who are left can only seek him through each other now, which is what part of why they're fighting.
I feel like I need to clarify. I'm just talking about the aesthetics of it. There was an eroticism to it aesthetically, but yeah, not in terms of like the context of the film.
Well, also, the last time Snow saw Moon was when she was having sex with him. She caught them having sex. She got mad. She killed him. And then they fight. So the sex is very much part of it.
The whole time at the calligraphy school, there's a sense of eroticism, not even necessarily like in a sexual way, but in this adherence to coming towards some kind of uppermost ideology, like ideal of beauty, right? Because Sword tries to draw the perfect
right
symbol.
It's this really high intensity environment where it's all these people, because we see a classroom at one point that's full of students who are so dedicated to their discipline, their art, that when the king's army is shooting arrows into the building and people are getting stabbed and dying and they try to escape, and then their professor is like, no, we must stay steadfast to our art, and they go back to their tables and they keep working. That type of like creative and intellectual intensity, I feel like it is erotic. I can't explain why it's erotic, but I think it is.
Yeah, I think it's hard to get at that.
So, yeah, I guess I don't really have thoughts on that. But I did have thoughts on violence. And,
Please.
The context of political histories. The whole news story is Luigi in the killing of the United Health CEO. And I'm like, and then some people are like, oh, but he killed a person. And I'm like, yes, but I feel like the violence was justified. And that he indirectly was violent to millions of Americans through the healthcare policies and denials.
I think that's an interesting point. I don't know if I would use the word justified simply because vigilante justice as a systemic solution, I don't think is something that we want. I don't think ultimately that would be good for us. So that's why I hesitate to say it's justified. But I think that it's important and essential to look at and understand why he was driven to the violence that he ended up enacting. And it makes sense when you hear the story about his own personal experiences with the healthcare system and his chronic pain. And I think the movie is looking at very much why are these individuals willing to, one, potentially sacrifice themselves for this greater cause, and two, why are they so driven to enact violence on this king? And so even if the movie doesn't necessarily condone that violence, because the movie ends with all three of them dying and the king surviving, and this idea that, oh, maybe the king can be a hero. He can like rehabilitate himself or something to be the hero, to be the ruler that the country needs. The movie is still asking us to understand why these different warriors and assassins were driven to violence.
I think I remember Maggie one time saying, I don't know how we're going to improve societal's material conditions without violence sometimes, right?
Yeah, and I was actually sitting here thinking, I'm comfortable with the word justified. We're all writers here, so maybe there is a better word for it. But I wouldn't really spend any time thinking about a new one because it feels true enough to me personally. is you can only take so much from somebody before they are willing to take your life. How far can you push someone? I had not thought about this current event in conversation with this movie, but it's really so interesting because in Nameless is making the decision to not kill the king. He had to have a belief beyond just nonviolence. He had to believe in the king's ability to understand why he was making the decision he was to save the king's life or to not take the king's life. And I just don't think American capitalists, assholes, are the kind that are ever going to, like, you couldn't just lay down your sword in front of a CEO of an organization and be like, listen, I could do this, but I'm not going to make the decision to do this in hopes that my goodness will reverberate. It wouldn't work. A question of vigilante justice, I think, is a question for another day.
Yeah.
But I do stand... I'm shrugging. You shouldn't have killed millions of people with the decisions that you were making with the power that you had.
Ooh. And I can't disagree with that.
So, yeah. I have some questions for you, Chanlee.
Okay.
This is kind of in a roundabout way brings us to them. My poet brain is showing is just like hinging on the word like comfort. When I said I'm comfortable with the word justification, even if it maybe isn't necessarily the best word. Because I listened to this podcast I listened to called Overthink. It's a philosophy podcast. Their recent episode was about comfort. And the word comfort, etymologically, its definition is gives strength. Something that gives strength, right? A fortification. So I was really thinking about that in terms of the poet. I wrote, this is a really big one. I wrote, what is the role of the poet in society? Which I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Very broad, large, giant question. But also, maybe that this is more of a leading question because I think that writing poetry is a source of comfort. It is something that gives us strength, especially in adolescence. And because even people who grow up to not be poets write poetry when they're teenagers. And I'm curious, Chanlee, if you have any ideas of why you think that is, of why adolescents are drawn to this very specific medium through which to talk about their giant feelings.
There's not as formalized structure. Because sometimes I'm like, I have to write sentences when I have to do papers. Sometimes I don't want to write sentences. I just want to write fragmented thoughts. And I think that's what poetry provides. These thoughts that meander but then eventually connect to. So I guess that's what a lot of adolescence is like the gaps in knowing but still trying to discover. And I think through the process of writing poetry, there is a discovery being made about yourself and your ideas and how they connect. As far as the poet's role in society, I do feel like poetry has to be political, and it is the poet's role to like witness things and write them down and try to understand within the context of everything, like those gaps and connections in a way that isn't so structured.
I love that answer. And it's also making me think like, okay, so we're all teenagers writing poetry. Is the shitty poetry we write then in our youth our first act of political defiance or political resistance to say, I'm going to engage in the world. I'm going to bear witness in this way that is inherently, there's like an anarchic quality to it. But it's our first act of political engagement. That's what I'm trying to say. Maybe. I don't know. What do you think?
I guess if you're an adolescent writing and like you're trying to just talk right through your feelings in a world that doesn't necessarily cater to your feelings. So that is an act of resistance.
Mm-hmm.
I like that Chanlee said that just now, because my initial reaction to the question you posed, Maggie, was, well, everything I wrote in my youth was so self-indulgent, totally unconcerned with anyone besides myself. I don't feel comfortable calling it an act of political resistance. But I think Chanlee makes an interesting point in that the world is often very dismissive of the adolescent head and the adolescent heart and the adolescent experience, which we've talked a lot about on this show already. I think more importantly, it's a very introductory thing. It's something that primes you for something bigger, something more communal, something less self-indulgent and self-centered eventually. But sometimes you can only get to that collective mindset by first starting with yourself and then eventually breaking free of it.
And you have to go through the self in order to look outwards.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking through your own eyes. And this brings me to my next question, actually. This idea of creating an archive. You're writing your own archive into being. And especially for women or people from communities of the global majority, there's even more of an urgency to document. Everyone who comes to the page at 13 years old to write a poem, I don't know that I would frame it as political resistance for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for people from certain like communities or demographics that, you know what I mean? I think that matters. I'm trying to think if my segue still exists, but I don't think it does.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Which is not, it's not a bad thing. So Chanlee is here today because she's our friend. Chanlee wrote a book called The Machine Autocorrects Code to I by Chanlee Luu. It was the winner of the 2024 Gene Feldman Poetry Prize. It came out just in October of this year, or of 2024. October 8th, I believe, was the exact publication date. And I'm going to read you a real quick synopsis of the book. A knockout debut that erases the boundaries of time and geography with unrestrained wit. The Machine Autocorrects Code to I holds its subjects, family members at odds, various fruits and animals constrained by the laws of humans, and an alien seeking beauty in the world with tenderness. In this experiment in forms, Chanlee Luu is a mad scientist, cracking Asian jokes, shoveling golden sand, and coding her voice to vitality. You should buy it. It's published by Washington Writers Publishing House, but you can get it anywhere books are sold, I would assume, right? Going back a little bit in the conversation when we were talking about the archive, I kind of wanted to talk about the movement of this book. The penultimate poem is called Process, and it is truly an archive of all of your notes from science-related homework throughout grades 5th through 12th. And I loved it. And I thought it was so well placed. There are some other lines in the book. On page 19, for example, from the poem, removing the H from sh creates multiplicity. You write, in film, characters become archive. In life, archive becomes archaeology. And I actually really quick had some questions about that, specifically in conversation with the movie. What kind of archive do you feel like the characters in the film created? What is their archaeology in terms of what do you feel like they uncover?
I mean, we've talked about how they do end up dying, and that becomes their legacy. But unwritten, since it probably wasn't written in any sort of way. So I guess as poets, we have to uncover that archive or that archaeology. I don't know how to answer that.
I feel like you answered it really well. Later, too, in the poem Census Taker 2020, after Robert Frost, in one of the last stanzas, you say, I am just trying to get accurate statistics. I am just trying to record history. And I just felt like those lines and the previous one I just read too, in the other poem, give us a kind of thesis for what this book is wanting to do. So I thought that it was especially interesting and perfect to end on a note of your youth, of an actual archive. And I think that the film does something similar, right, where it's creating archives of pasts and then potential futures that don't actually exist. But once you say them into the world, they exist somewhere, at least in the mind of the film or in the mind of the viewer. And I think that your book is doing something similar. And so it made so much sense that you wanted to have them in conversation with each other. At the beginning of this episode, when you talked about truth and untruth, but as you write down these truths or these getting towards the truth, your credibility comes from your adherence to the sciences. You're moving through these visions of life and experience and pop culture. And then it's always grounded in the science of it all. And so I guess I was curious just about your process in general, in terms of, did you see this as a kind of archive? And if so, what do you hope it does in terms of like your own archaeology?
It is like an archive of my life thus far and of some family histories, but not all of it because I don't have the access to it. Yeah, I really loved your analysis, but I guess I don't really have I don't know if I have an answer.
Can you talk about the process of like why you chose to put process towards the end?
Okay, so the third section is my science section, and science is so much a part of like how I see the world that it needed to be included. And I think in terms of rhythm, I wanted to put it. I knew I wanted the last poem to be a shorter one, so that's why the longer one had to be in between. But I think the process poem is like a thesis in terms of the history archive of my own homework. Also, these themes of we're starting at the cell level and ending in this like magical fantasy of alternative futures and magic, which I guess circles back to the past of that intersection of science and magic. So that's why that was in conclusion kind of thing towards the end.
I love hearing you talk about it. And I think that, at least for me as a reader, that really comes through structurally.
You just said so many wonderful things, Chanlee, and I feel like an adult for the thing the thing that I'm hinging on the most is the way you were like, well, because the second to last poem was really long, I needed to end on a short poem. But I love that you said that because that is so true. That's the kind of rhythmic thing that lots of non-writers don't realize, in that sometimes it does come down to these very practical decisions in terms of length. How can I create variety? But I feel like that response that you gave in focusing on that specific thing, I had this really long poem and then I wanted to end on a shorter poem. That even feels attuned to the scientific background that you bring to the whole book and the way that that third section you say is the most science oriented. Because even though that's not this super highly advanced science thing to be like, oh, long poem followed by short poem to create rhythmic balance, it's methodical, right? And so as I was reading the book, I was like, I feel like I'm feeling her method of arrangement, which to just most readers will feel like magic.
Chanlee, is there like a poem that you would read for us or that you want to read for us? So we can hear the methodical magic in your own voice.
Oh, wait. So, I guess, I don't know if you remember, but during the ending reading that we had, I wanted you to come up and do the footnotes,
Oh, yeah.
but it was on my phone, so it was too small. Oh, so would you do me the honor of doing some footnotes?
I would love that.
All right. The IPCC,
Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
it's virtually certain, but not everybody is.
Rondel form, not to be confused with rondelette or short rondel or rondeau.
It is unequivocal that facts
Feelings, such as despair, are valid here, too.
are a swell thing. Confident,
Confidence is a construct.
humans and their brains influence so many crucial chains. This medium,
Not too large, not tiny, just mid-sized, but
Gla-
not just right.
glacier,
Not the one that sank the Titanic. In today's world, would it be fake news?
is melting. This wellness guide
Could be any number of people, not just Gwyneth Paltrow.
has new followers to gain. It is unequivocal that facts are a swell thing. Confident humans in their brains created stories of sirens,
Mermaid-like singing creatures. Not the villains, by the way.
belting higher while rising seas collect the rain. Now scientists write to save natural pain. It is unequivocal that facts are a swell thing. Confident humans in their brains influence so many crucial chains.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was fun. Thank you. You're a really good poet, in case you didn't already know it.
Thanks.
And if you liked that poem, the rest of them are just as good in the book. So you should buy it.
You should. Is there anywhere specific you would prefer people buy the book from?
I've been mostly sending people bookshop links so they can just get it from wherever their favorite indie store is.
Anything? Do you have anything like coming out or any events that we should know about? Or
Plugs,
yeah,
as they say.
plug yourself.
The coolest thing that's come out of the publishing side of this is that I had creative freedom to do the cover I wanted, so I commissioned a queer Vietnamese artist in DC named Anthony Lay, and he invited me to this collective Vietnamese American exhibit thing. So we're doing 50 years of hopes and ha-has, taken from an Ocean Vuong poem for the 50th year anniversary of the fall of Saigon, which is what caused a lot of Vietnamese immigration. So that's going to be an exhibit in DC, and my poem's going to be on a wall of the exhibit. Opening is January 16th, I think, in DC.
That's amazing. Where is it at?
I don't have the exact address yet, but somewhere in DC.
That's so exciting.
That's really fucking cool. We'll be sure once all the information is public, we can put the information in the show notes for this episode. Future listeners, go check the show notes.
Yeah.
Because when this is out, the information will be there.
Mm-hmm.
We got to ask a question. Chanlee, we end every episode with the question, what does this movie make you want to tell your younger self? That question can be a little more malleable today because we did talk about the movie, but we also talked about a lot of other things. So just anything you want to tell your younger self, or if there's something specific in the movie that the movie makes you want to tell your younger self.
I mean, I think my epigraph was keep fighting, keep dancing. That's kind of for my younger self, for the alienated, keep fighting, keep dancing, for my younger self and for everybody. And I was thinking of other movies for this episode as well, and V for Vendetta was one of them.
I have not seen that.
Oh, okay, because it's like, remember November the 5th, and that's my birthday, but it's also like about fascism in one of the lines in there. What's a revolution without dancing as well? And I was thinking of like all the student protests, and some of my favorite clips were of just the students dancing.
I think that's great.
It's beautiful.
And then I was thinking of your question, girlhood movies, and I was like, what is my favorite girlhood movie? And then I like rewatched it very late last night, and I think it is Uptown Girls.
I have not seen that, but I know that it has had a major cultural resurgence recently because it did not get very good reviews when it was first released.
Yeah, because sexism.
Right, exactly. And now people are like, actually, this movie rules, and we all should have respected Brittany Murphy more.
When I was a kid, like I didn't understand it enough to like cry. I did tear up last night when watching it.
Nice.
But yeah, it would come on the TV all the time, which is I miss that about cable.
There's just less decision making. And then,
Okay. Thank you so much for listening. We would love if you subscribe to the show on your podcast listening platform of choice and turn on post notifications. That way you will not miss an episode.
check the show notes for the secondary text we referenced. Well, we didn't really reference. I mean, Chanlee's book was our secondary.
Yeah.
Was our text.
Yeah.
To go with this film. You can follow the podcast on Instagram at Tell Me I'm Sorry and email us your own musings and questions at tellmeimsorry@gmail.com. There is also a Patreon that exists. There's nothing on it yet, but please go ahead and subscribe because things will be on there. You can follow me on Instagram at _Saint_Margaret_.
I'm Marin.
And I'm Maggie.
I'm Chanlee.
Thank you so much. Bye.